Hey, LinkedIn, welcome back to another Attack IQ live session. This one is the first in the Attack IQ Academy Summer Security Foundation series. So I don't know if it was last year or the year before, we had a summer school learning path, and so many people found that helpful. So we thought we'd give it another shot and do it again. But this time, we're adding a little bit of extra to it. We're adding these live sessions. Kind of think of these like, a group study session, but it's with the internet, right? So these are going to be sessions that are focused on the specific courses that are in that summer security learning path. If you haven't already signed up for it, go ahead, sign up for the Summer Security Foundations Learning Path on the Academy site. It's quick, easy, doesn't take much time at all. And it'll get you an extra badge if you complete the learning path. Some of you might already have completed the courses, and that's great, but you should still come back to these webinars so we can enhance your learning with these discussions. So today, we're going to be reviewing some of the information covered in the Foundations of Operationalizing MITRE Attack course. So if you've taken it already, this is great. We're going to go ahead and review some of the stuff you've already learned. I'm going to talk about it. This is a great time and place for you to ask your questions. So please make sure you put your questions in the comments so that we can see it. And as long as the questions are about the topic at hand, because sometimes I get asked some crazy security questions that don't really have to do with what we're talking about, but as long as they have to do with the topic at hand, we'll go ahead and get it answered for you. So please feel free at any time as we're going through this to ask your questions. Okay, so let's see here. Cover this is about attack. We covered that you need to sign up for the learning path. And we covered that you need to ask questions. So that's the important part. For those of you that don't know me, that means you probably haven't taken this class already because I am the instructor for it. My name is Keith Wilson. I am the Director of Cybersecurity Education for AttackIQ. What does that mean? It means I run AttackIQ Academy. Now, if you're not familiar with AttackIQ Academy, I highly suggest you go over to academy.attackiq.com. Go register for free right now. I know it's crazy, but maybe for some of you, this is the first time you've ever heard of AttackIQ Academy. It's free cybersecurity training. We don't charge a thing for it. We have a very strong focus on threat-informed defense and topics like that around attack. And we're going to talk about threat-informed defense here in our first slide. So what is threat-informed defense? And the MITRE Ingenuity Center for Threat-Informed Defense, or the CTID, they're a nonprofit organization. We talk about them a bit more in these courses. They discuss threat-informed defense as a continuous process with 3 dimensions. So you got cyber threat intelligence. And this is where you start, right? You start with a cyber threat intelligence because we are informed by our threats in this defensive setup. You infuse this threat intelligence throughout your defenses, and it's used to inform both testing and defensive measures, meaning you're looking at cyber threat intelligence that is focused on threat actors or campaigns that are likely to affect your enterprise where you work, whatever network you're guiding. So the threat intelligence should be focused on adversaries that focus on you, right? If you're concerned about, if you're a company that only exists in the United States, and say you're a healthcare company that only exists in the United States, and there's an attacker or a campaign that's launched that only focuses on, let's say, Asian enterprises or Asian manufacturing enterprises. Well, that campaign isn't necessarily focused on what you do, so it's not something that you're going to pay a ton of attention to. What you are going to pay attention to are the adversaries that attack healthcare companies in the United States, and then the steps they take, right? So we're starting with threat intelligence. It's the basis for everything. And then you're going to base your defensive countermeasures, which is the second pillar, on that threat intelligence, right? So this is your detection tools, your sensors, your SIM, and preventative tools that are used to subvert known attackers' behavior. And again, this is all informed by intelligence. So you're planning your defensive measures based on the threat intelligence that you receive. Now, how can you really thoroughly evaluate that, which is the third pillar, and that's testing and evaluating, right? First of all, let's answer the question, what are we susceptible to, right? Based on the intelligence that we have today, what is our where are our gaps? What is our network already susceptible to? And we do this through emulating adversaries, right? So you can emulate adversaries in a purple teaming engagement, which we teach more about in Foundations of Purple Teaming. We've got a session on that later. So you purple teaming engagement, maybe some sort of pen test that you've done, but any sort of test that is aligned with the actions of the adversaries reported in that threat intelligence. You're going to emulate that against your existing controls and see where your gaps lie. So we teach a course on doing this. It's called with breach and attack simulation. And it's called gap analysis with assessment designed for gap analysis, and that's a breach and attack simulation course, right? So that focuses on trying to find where your gaps are based on that cyber threat intelligence. Okay. And I mentioned breach and attack simulation. That's what AttackIQ does. We live in the breach and attack simulation marketplace. If you only know AttackIQ Academy, then you may think all we do is education, but actually the actual company that supports all of AttackIQ Academy is AttackIQ. And AttackIQ is a breach and attack simulation solution, which makes those purple teaming and threat emulation exercises scalable, because now instead of only focusing on maybe 1 to 4% of my network because of the amount of manual work that has to be done, I can increase to 25, 30, 50, 70, 80, 90% of my network maybe I'm covering with testing. And I'm able to do that with using a breach and attack simulation solution. So what does attack, ATT&CK, what does the attack framework have to do with any of this? So it's the common vocabulary to describe attacker actions, and it's free and open source for intelligence as well. So they list things like campaigns, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and different threat actor behavior. So it is an open source intelligence source. But most importantly, it's a common vocabulary that we can all share as cybersecurity practitioners, and it helps us by describing the behaviors in our threat intelligence that we're going to test for in our testing and evaluation, and that we're going to apply defensive measures to. So again, if you've got any questions at all, please put them in the comments, and we'll try and get them answered for you. So please, got questions, put them in there. That's what these sessions are all about. I want to make sure that you are fully understanding the attack framework, what it's actually useful for. What does it actually do for us? Okay. So let's talk about the tactics, techniques, and procedures. This is the core of the attack framework. Now, if you've taken the course, you're already familiar with my analogy here of the tactic, technique, procedure here. So your tactic are your overall goals, the adversary's overall goals. And in the course, I relate this back to, maybe you're trying to get to work safely, or maybe you're trying to stay healthy, right? An adversary's goals could be stealing sensitive data, disrupting operations, establishing a foothold in a network. So they've got their overarching goals are the categories of techniques, and we call those tactics. Okay. Techniques are the methods used to achieve those goals. So an adversary might use phishing emails to gain initial access to a network, followed by techniques such as lateral movement and privilege escalation to gain a deeper understanding. And in the analogy, I talk about how you might drive or take public transit or walk to work, right, to get to work safely. Or you might take a walk or work out or visit the doctor regularly, wash your hands, that sort of thing to stay healthy. Now, walking covers both, right? So techniques can span multiple tactics. You can take the same actions to achieve different goals, have different motivators behind your action. And then the procedures are the specific implementations of techniques. So for example, a procedure for lateral movement might involve using stolen credentials to log into another system. Well, another procedure might involve using a tool like RDP or remote desktop to connect to that system, right? So they're the different, more specific step-by-step instructions on how you do it. And now procedures, they they can get a little difficult to understand, right? And I think I've got a slide in here a little bit later where we're going to talk about procedures versus sub techniques, because I think that's where most of the confusion comes in. But let's just again summarize, knowing that tactics, the overall goals, techniques are the behaviors an attacker is going to exhibit in order to achieve those goals, and the procedures are those step-by-step actions that they're taking. So what does this actually translate to in cybersecurity? Simply put, better detections and preventions. Now, the pyramid of pain is what I'm showing on here. And this comes from SANS, I believe. The pyramid of pain, you'll notice the higher you go, the harder it is to operationalize the things you can detect and prevent. Now, hash values are easy to detect, and they're also easy for an attacker to change. So the good news is, just because it's harder for you to detect, that means it's also more difficult for the attacker to change up that technique. So you can keep that detection or that mitigation in place much longer by focusing on things at the top, right? So the behaviors, like things like behaviors or TTPs of an attacker, they're much more difficult to detect. And like I said, very difficult for the attacker to change. So that's why understanding TTPs is important, because if we can focus our detections, our mitigations on behaviors, then we have the most likelihood of preventing or detecting some sort of an attack that isn't going to be a false positive. And that can't just be easily changed, resulting in a false negative by the attacker, right? So the more we focus on TTPs or behaviors, the better off we are. All right, so I told you a second ago about trying to understand the difference between sub-techniques and procedures. And I know we go over this in the course, but because the question comes up for me so often, I think it's important to cover this again. So I'm going to pause here for a second before we get into this. I know we got a question. So can you include more guidance on what is an active maintenance at MITRE or more end of life? For example, MITRE crits looks not actively supported anymore. Okay. Yeah, so I can give a little bit of an answer with that, because I do work with the CTID, the Center for Threat Informed Defense. AttackIQ is a founding research partner, and my position at AttackIQ, I've been lucky enough to be able to work with the folks that are part of the center, and they are the ones that are responsible for a lot of these updates to some of these tools, or the MITRE Ingenuity team as well. The problem being, MITRE is a nonprofit organization, right? So they rely on donations, which they've set up a great benefactor program. They set up this great way for companies to sponsor all of these different projects. Yeah, you're right. Crits really hasn't been touched for a while. Things like TRAM, I think, recently got a facelift a little bit. Navigator gets frequent updates. I believe the attack framework itself is maintained by the MITRE Ingenuity team, and that gets updates twice a year. So I think we just had one, but they usually do one in like the spring, and they'll do another one in the fall. So we get 2 updates on the attack framework a year. That's traditionally what it's been. The other things, I don't know that they actively have developers on them the way that like a commercial company would. It's more done on a project by project basis. So as the community expresses a need for updates, or maybe it's seen that enough. The tool just isn't cutting it anymore, and it's time for an update. Members from the CTID may suggest it as a project that they take on, then it gets voted on, it goes through a whole process, right? So the short answer to your question is the CTID, or the Center for Threat Informed Defense. The companies and people involved with that are the ones that have really been putting the focus on maintaining different tools, creating new ones, and then generating other projects to support attack. There's also things like defend, right, that to me it still appear to be an alpha, and I don't know if they'll ever get out. Again, that's just one of those, when it's an open source project, you can only fund certain things, right? And I don't know that there's any necessarily any sort of rhyme or reason to updates on these other projects. But the attack framework itself, from what from history, from what we've seen, gets updated, gets 2 updates a year, where they tend to not really change the framework too much. I mean, occasionally they do. So, they added sub techniques at one point. But they tend to add a lot more content during these updates as well. And you can. This is also my chance to encourage you to submit techniques and things like that to MITRE for consideration, or in tools like crits, if you can write to them. And if you can't get in touch with anybody at MITRE, maybe ping me on LinkedIn. That's fine too. Or you can shoot me an email. I'm Keith at AttackIQ.com. So you can shoot me an email too, and I can see, maybe I can get it to the right people for you. But I believe that they've got a process in place for tools, but you have to really give them like a reason to update. So if you've got ideas or things like that, the CTID is going to be the group probably to focus on contacting. And if I wish I could give you a direct contact there, but I don't really know who that would be. So check out their website. If you can't find anything there and you have some ideas, please hit me up and I'll see if we can pass this on. Hope that answers the question for you. Okay, so let's talk about procedures and sub techniques. And procedures they're one of those more difficult concepts to grasp. I mentioned earlier, right? We can talk about techniques being one thing that I think a lot of people understand the behavior side of it. Like, people understand what phishing is, but they don't understand, they just hear phishing and they think that's the end of it. Now, when you hear sub technique, that's okay. That sounds like it's a bit more specific. So there you have that problem, right? If I tell you a procedure is a more specific way of understanding a technique, well, then what's a sub technique? It could go by the exact same definition. So what makes them different? So remember that a sub technique, they're ways to further break down and describe the specific methods used by adversaries to achieve their goals. So, in an example of the sub technique of spear phishing attachment, that's a general action, but it's more specific than just phishing. But it doesn't like go through specifics, right? It doesn't tell me what type of attachment I'm sending. It doesn't say what accounts are being targeted or what type of accounts are being targeted. Maybe there's a certain subject line that's used in the emails that's very specific, or certain content. Maybe the goal is to take you to a site instead of an attachment, right? So there's different, it breaks down the sub technique, and all of those questions get answered in a procedure, right? If I'm going, okay, so how do I do this? My sub technique is spear phishing. So I've got my target list, and the subject line would be part of my procedures. The whether I include a link would be part of my procedure. Where the link goes could be part of my procedure, right? It's the more finer details of what's going on. Now, by examining procedures, security professionals can gain an understanding of how an attack unfolds. This allows you to create more tailored and effective defensive strategies. And this is what's really great about purple teaming too, right? If I've got if I work on the blue team and my job is to defend the network, and I really want to learn more about threat emulation, how procedures are carried out, in order to better protect it, right? Because if I understand the ways that my adversaries are coming at me, I can probably tune my tools and figure out my architecture a little bit better. I get to interact with my red team, my emulation professionals that know how to do this, and I can see cause and effect at each point. And I'm hoping this little bit that I'm giving you, this little nugget on purple teaming, is enticing you, if you haven't taken Foundations of Purple Teaming, to take what's going to be a future conversation. That's the Foundations of Purple Teaming course. Another thing that you can do to try and really understand procedures, and I teach a much longer sort of live class that we call Mastering MITRE Attack, where we get into the nitty gritty of a lot of this and go over so many different MITRE topics. But we use the emulation plans to better understand procedures. Another thing that the CTID did was release adversary emulation plans, which detail how to behave exactly like the adversary. So it's a step-by-step walkthrough of procedures, and they reference the attack framework throughout, so you can see where techniques and tactics fit into this as well. So if you've never looked at an emulation plan before, I highly recommend you do. You can just Google search CTID adversary emulation library, and it's going to be a GitHub project that you can go to and check out all the different emulation plans that are in there. Or you can take our course. We've got a course on menu pass emulation. We've got a course on Fin6 emulation plans. We've got a course on micro emulation plans. We teach different breach and attack simulation courses. So again, if you haven't signed up, if this is your first exposure to AttackIQ Academy, definitely recommend you go sign up, because we've got, I think we're up to 30 courses now that are available to everybody. So lots of material there. Okay. Another reminder, if you're just joining, please put your questions in the comments and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So I do want to hit on two things that are slightly nuanced, and only because people don't talk about them too much when they talk about the attack framework. Generally, they focus on the TTPs, but we want to talk about data sources, and then we're going to talk about campaigns. So a data source represents the various subjects or topics of information that can be collected by sensors or logs. So if you've got network sensors set up, that's a data source. If you're collecting log files from a host machine, that's a data source. If you're collecting log files from your firewall or your other security devices, those are all data sources. Data sources also include data components, which identify specific properties or values of a data source relevant to detecting a given attack technique or sub-technique. Now, this means that for each data source, we should expect a listing of techniques that can be detected by the sensors or logs on a data source. Let's see. Let me go ahead and pop the attack framework up over here real quick. Just so, and I know this is actually here. I'm going to move this over here so I can, nope, because I'm still sharing that. So I gotta look off to the side over here. So I'm not going to be looking at you. It's going to look a little weird while I look over here and reference at this thing. But I've got the attack framework up here, and we want to understand what data sources are. So let's go ahead and look at some of the techniques in the enterprise. Pull that up. Detection references. Oh man, I wish I would have had a good example pulled up already. I think this is changed up. Here we go. It's under defenses, data sources. So here's the listing of all the different areas where you can collect information, right? And I mentioned a firewall. So if I click on that, I can see the type of techniques that I should be able to observe based on my firewall logs, right? So that's a quick example of data sources. Now let's talk about campaigns real quick. So let's go ahead and bring that back over here. So a campaign, simply put, is any grouping of intrusion activity conducted over a specific period of time with common targets and objectives. So I think this is what we normally think of when we think of advanced persistent threats, right? They will have a campaign where they're targeting very similar, it's the same group that's targeting very similar targets. Their objectives don't change much. Their techniques really don't change much. And that's helpful to us as defenders because we can look at what's been done in the past and make some assumptions or some educated guesses even that it's going to be done in the future. So campaigns really just look like this combination of groups and software, right? So you can see they put multiple campaigns on their site. I think Operation Dust Storm is a pretty famous one. So we can see the different techniques used in the campaign here, right? So if I'm reading this and going, and I haven't looked at this specific, but if I'm reading this and going, oh man, it looks like I could be a target for Operation Dust Storm, then maybe I should plan an emulation activity around it. And to do that, I should try and focus on emulating these techniques that are listed in here, because that's what happens in Operation Dust Storm. Or make sure I'm able to detect the use of these different pieces of software that's listed. So campaigns are very helpful in letting us know what's been done in the past so that we can have an educated guess of what could potentially be done in the future. Okay. All right, so there's some attack tools, and this is my last slide, then we'll go ahead and answer any questions you may have remaining. But this is just a handful of some of the tools, and I mentioned some of these earlier. So if I was going through these quick and you heard something, you're like, what was that? Hopefully this will clear some of that up for you. There are many projects and tools focused around supporting the attack framework. Navigator is probably the one you're most familiar with. This is a visualization tool, right? So when we look at the attack framework and we see it highlighted in different things, that's done with Navigator. We have a course called Applications of Attack Navigator if you'd like to learn how to use that. They also, by they, I mean the CTID, they released the Top Attack Techniques Calculator. This is used by allowing you to put in some information about your organization, and it'll give you the top 10 techniques. And you're not sharing this information with anyone. In fact, you can download this calculator directly if you don't want to use the cloud version of it. You could download it directly, the open source, and just run it locally because you're not sharing this information with anybody. But this calculator is used to help you. You input some information about your organization, then it gives you the top 10 techniques that your organization should focus on based on that information. And it's really one of the biggest questions I get asked about attack is, where do I start? Because one of the biggest, and the guys from MITRE Ingenuity will tell you the same thing, one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to boil the ocean with attack, trying to provide coverage for every single technique, and that's just not possible. Right. So top attack techniques calculator helps it be a little less overwhelming by giving you the top 10 that you should start with. Okay, I know we're running really close on time, so please bear with me. I may go a little over, but it's a LinkedIn live session, so we're a little bit more laid back here, I think. There's the DEFEND framework. This is a framework of defensive behaviors that includes knowledge maps that show you an attack technique, the actions you can take to mitigate the technique, and the artifacts that those affect. So it's a really good way to understand how an attacker behavior has an effect on the things within your environment, and then the different mitigations that you can take to prevent or detect that behavior, and then also what those those prevents or detects, what effect those have on the things in your environment. CAR, so MITRE CAR, this is the Cyber Analytics Repository. This is a repo of detection rules, or analytics as they refer to them. So here you may find pseudocode, Sigma rules, things like that link back to different attack techniques. TRAM is used to map descriptions used in threat reports to attack TTPs. So if you're trying to do alignment of your cyber threat intel and be fully threat-informed defense, you can use TRAM when sorting through reports to pull out keywords and phrases and things like that align with the attack framework so that you understand what techniques are being used. Okay. Then the last obligatory slide, questions. So I'm gonna vamp a little bit here while I've got the questions slide up. If you have any questions, go ahead, put them in. So far, I think we only had one for this course, it looks like. Let's see. What is the level on which large players like Microsoft, Palo Alto, Cisco, FortiGate, etc., contribute to the attack database in order to maintain the quality and completeness of content in there? Or are there other types of organizations contributing to the content? So I don't know about the attack framework specifically in the content. Generally, there's somebody referenced in each technique for who reported it, and I haven't gone to look like who does that. It's I know they're all security researchers for the most part, right? But it's I don't know who makes that up. What I will say is the Center for Threat Informed Defense. You see a lot of the larger players in security and more advanced security teams too. So Microsoft, I don't know if Palo Alto, I can't remember if Palo Alto, Cisco, FortiGate, but I know you're just throwing those out there as kind of the bigger names in security. The Center for Threat Informed Defense has many companies like that. I know for a fact that Microsoft's part of it, along with AttackIQ. But you've got banks and credit card companies and things like that with like outstanding security teams and kind of above and beyond security teams that are a part of it. So you get these, you get contributions to attack in that way, but the actual content of attack, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't taken the time to sit down and look. I just know that it's reported by all sorts of people, not necessarily just vendors. Okay, looks like my next question in here. How do I get the board to understand the value of AttackIQ on ROI in the OT space? So AttackIQ is going to be different than attack. I want to make sure we're not confusing that, but let's go ahead and talk about AttackIQ. So the ROI that AttackIQ can provide is, well, by testing first to understand where do my gaps lie instead of putting some structure around your buying process. We want to emulate the threats that are likely to attack us. I don't know that we have anything, specifically for OT systems. It's one of our sales engineers would be better served to answer that. But essentially, you still want to run tests, regardless of if it's the AttackIQ platform or not. The benefit being you understand where your gaps are, so you have a more focused approach to buying tools. Then you can, once you're implementing those tools, you can continue to test, right? To make sure that the tools are being deployed properly and that they're doing what you expect them to do in terms of preventing or detecting, right? They're also good for vendor selection, right? If you have this list of emulations that you know your attackers are likely to go against or use against you, and you have gaps for, well, you can take those same emulations and tell your vendors, like, listen, we're going to be testing your product in our POC, and we'll be doing these 5 different behaviors, and we're going to see if you catch it. So it's helpful for vendor selection as well, because you know that, okay, we need you to, we're susceptible to these techniques. These techniques are could affect us. We want to see what you can do in terms of prevention and detection, so you can use it for testing. Next, you use it, like I said, for deployment. Make sure that it's implemented correctly. So many security tools don't get implemented correctly, or they don't have, and it's not, malicious or anything. It's usually just out of ignorance. Think about it. You get this new complicated enterprise grade security tool. You don't necessarily have time to learn everything about it right up front, and you've got to implement, right? So you start setting things up, and maybe your settings are different than the settings that you did during the POC, and running tests again, those same emulation tests, you're just repeating, right? You run them again. Then you can run to see if, if the deployment is going as expected. Then you have ongoing, right? What happens when updates are applied and settings get changed over time? Am I still protected? So you're still running your emulation testing again. And the value here with using a solution like AttackIQ is that it allows you to scale this, right? If I were to run emulations manually, I could only hit a small portion of my network, and I could only do it like once, maybe twice a year. But if I've got a tool that can reach out to a higher percentage of my network, I'm more confident in the results. So I can, with the scalability, I'm more confident in the results. Plus, I can do testing more frequently. I can set it on an automated schedule so that I just need to be aware when something goes wrong. Now, if you're talking about attack, proposing attack is valuable to the board, there's really no ROI. I don't know that there's an ROI discussion, which makes me think you're talking about AttackIQ specifically, just because attack itself is free. But when you are discussing it with other people, and if they're wanting to know what's important about attack, it's the common vocabulary, right? It's a common vocabulary. It's a form of threat intel. All right. I think that's all the questions we have. I'll give another second here. But you guys have been a great audience. Let's see. Just want to make sure I don't miss any more questions. I think that was it. All right. Don't forget our next, and I recommend you start working on it now because it's a long course. It's like a 5-hour course, Foundations of AI Security. It's also our newest course, getting fantastic reviews from people. I put a lot of work into it because I think it's very important. If you haven't taken the course, take it now. Start taking it now, because we're going to come back in 2 weeks on July 9th. We're going to be having this same sort of discussion for that course. So again, thank you for joining our session today. I really hope I was able to answer all of your questions. If not, hit me up on LinkedIn. You can ping me there. You can always email academy@attackiq.com too with your educational questions, and we'll get them answered for you. All right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. We'll see you back in 2 weeks here on July 9th.